Let's check in with Joseph Lindsley in Ukraine.
Touching these political things is difficult in America, but it's a little bit more difficult to face missiles and drones from an evil empire that I don't think is going to stop here.
Joe. Little fucking Joe Lindsley.
Joe Lindsley is quickly becoming an American treasure in broadcasting.
Welcome to Ukraine Bank.
News from Ukraine this morning. At least 200,000 users are without power in Kharkiv and nearby regions after Russian strikes. President Zelensky announced that in his nightly address last night. There also are reported emergency power shutdowns in Odessa after a Russian attack. Let's find out what's happening in Kyiv. That's where Joseph Lindsley is today. Joe, what's the latest?
Bob, good afternoon from Kyiv. I just arrived here at midday on the train from Kharkiv, and there's a lot going on. In fact, it seems that we are certainly in a new phase, something we've not seen before, a new phase of Russia's invasion of Ukraine after 2 years of this full-scale war. I arrived in Kyiv today at the main railway station to the news that Russians had pounded the city with hypersonic missiles around 10:30 this morning, and I will tell you in a moment what I've learned about that since then. But first, an update on what happened since I spoke to you on Friday. You know, it was a miracle, really, that I was able to connect with you. After that, I barely had any opportunity to connect either to the internet or to cell services. There was no power and water for several days throughout Kharkiv city. We did have maybe 1 or 2 hours a day of electricity, but the city was still continuing. People were running on generators. And in fact, on Friday, you know, it was after those 15 missiles hit the city early Friday morning, they pinpointed, I think it seems, all of the electrical substations within Kharkiv. It was a very precise attack, and it was successful in taking out that electrical infrastructure. And to show you a bit of the spirit of the city, I talked with many people who they tried at first to work, like, to go up on the rooftop to get a cell signal. And people realized that was hopeless. And so it became a strange kind of holiday. An unintended consequence from Russia with love. People couldn't connect to the internet, and everyone has been exhausted for so many months that people took the day to it was decent weather and to sort of enjoy it. And so that's how Ukrainians have been able to turn these difficult moments into something better. But as I was leaving Kharkiv and as of last night, some power was returning, but it still is a very difficult situation. It's just a frustration. It makes things difficult, but people keep going. Meanwhile, there was a major attack yesterday morning on the Lviv region, and over that beautiful historic center of Lviv, the white tower of the city hall and the market square, drones and missiles were flying directly overhead in a way that they really haven't in these past 2 years. That was not their target, so nothing was damaged there in the center. They went to a little city called Stry, a little bit south of Lviv, about a 30-minute drive. I know people in that city. I've been there before. I was there at Christmas. It's a very small place, and that city was absolutely pounded by missiles. The Russians, it seems, are targeting infrastructure, including perhaps oil pipelines that would connect, deliver oil and gas to Europe. But this was a very intense and unusual thing. And yesterday morning, also, Russian missiles, it seems, entered Polish airspace for a few moments during their sort of, as they do as I always call it, their dance macabre, as they try to confuse air defense. They change directions all the time, and they entered into Polish airspace. And then this morning, the alarms went off just about 10:30 here in Kyiv while I was on the train somewhere in the eastern part of the country. And within, I think, 10 seconds, from what I heard from everyone, within 10 seconds of the alarm, boom, there was a hypersonic missile hit Kyiv. And usually, Bob, there's always notification. You at least have 5 or probably 10 minutes before something hits. It seems that this was launched from the Crimean Peninsula, and it only took about 2 minutes for that missile to arrive. 10 seconds after the alarm went off, this video that's being widely circulated now, taken by a colleague of mine, of children running to the shelters because the sounds were so intense in the center of the city, something that you don't hear very often in Kyiv. And then meanwhile, with behind all this context, we have as the topic that has dominated global headlines, the mourning in Moscow because of that attack on a concert venue. And my main response to that is, I don't trust anything that comes out of Russia. We do see, there's a lot since Putin's reelection. We see a new phase of this war. We see a lot going on with informational warfare. And I was on Friday night. I was speaking on a foreign television channel, which I won't name. They're great people, and they wanted to ask. They were asking me about this attack at the Moscow concert venue. And while they were asking me that, by the way, after all those events on Friday, the Russians were sending Iranian drones over Kharkiv. And while I was reporting on this TV channel, my building shook because one of the Iranian drones exploded nearby. And I was trying to tell this TV channel, hey, I love to talk about Moscow, but we're getting attacked right now by Moscow. And the Russians have been very good at manipulating or using this story to gain sympathy and to ignore what's happening in Ukraine. But my basic take on it, as I thought about it on the train today, is I don't trust anything that comes from Moscow, and I won't trust it until they release that Wall Street Journal reporter, Evan Gershkovich. He's been in jail now for 1 year, since March of last year, in a Moscow dungeon. In a Russian prison somewhere in Russia. And until they release him to cover what happens in Moscow, I don't trust anything that comes out of Russia.
Joseph, do the citizens of Russia get the news that it is highly likely that ISIS-K is responsible for the attack on that concert hall? Or do you think most of the people in Russia do believe Putin's claim that Ukraine was somehow involved?
I think probably they do believe that. I mean, there's always conflicting messages. Probably a lot of people think ISIS was somehow collaborating, and there's such a informational chaos, and this is exactly what Russians have been very good at sowing, going back to Soviet times. But perhaps you saw the headlines that Hamas, said that they stand in solidarity with Moscow, against this heinous attack, and I think the first rule is that they seek to sow chaos, and if we look at Moscow's actions, this is not in a vacuum. Putin has solidified his power even more with that re-election. There were leaked documents that British media revealed around March 12th. It's hard to know, of course, how accurate all this stuff is, but around March 12th, they released documents saying, it's in the weeks after such an election that in the pattern of Putin's history these past 20 years, that he does more extraordinary things because he thinks he's got more control of his population, and always trying to, when you deal with dissatisfaction at home, to try to get people feel that they are being attacked. And so this Moscow, the concert hall incident does not occur in a vacuum. It occurs with an increased intensity upon Ukraine, the likes of which we haven't seen. I mean, we've seen increased attacks, sort of several days of increased attacks upon Kyiv now and then during these past 2 years, but not with this level of weaponry. If you look at what happened in Western Ukraine yesterday, Eastern Ukraine on Friday, Kyiv today, I do not think we should. I think we should be very hyper alert to see how this might be tied to that attack at the concert hall in Moscow.
Interesting. Joe, we only have a minute or so left here, but I need to get your reaction to some listener feedback. You were understandably frustrated Friday when we spoke because you were right in the middle of Kharkiv getting bombed. And I want to get your response to some of these emails and texts. Let me read them here. Can someone remind Joe that the United States has no obligation to help Ukraine at all, and bitching and moaning about it like we owe them does not sound good. Something is wrong. Somebody should tell Joseph to stop being a crybaby. This isn't America's war. The U.S. has given the Ukraine more than any other country. What about France, Italy, Germany, and England? Why don't they send weapons? I really like Joe, but he really has to be careful about the way he speaks about the White House. He's going to alienate people here. And then we also got a couple of messages like this. Please let Joe know how grateful we are for his information on Ukraine for over 2 years now. Thank him for being in Ukraine and believing in Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. Joe?
Well, first, when you mentioned the UK, yesterday there was a major Ukrainian attack on the Crimean Peninsula, on key Russian infrastructure, thanks to Storm Shadow missiles from the United Kingdom. The United States refuses to provide weapons like that, but the UK does, things that can actually turn the situation around. And I mean, I think that on days when I've been through 15 missiles, although I slept through that, where falling around me and I could barely get a connection, and really in the hell of the war, I think it is of value to share the real emotions of that moment. And by the way, talking about what the United States owes, I mean, no matter, there's a question of, what is our moral compass, but forget about that. The United States pushed Ukraine to get rid not only of its nuclear weapons, but of all of its best military equipment. When President Obama was a senator, he and Dick Lugar, Republican of Indiana, it was a bipartisan effort. They actually came here to supervise the dismantling of Ukraine's protective mechanisms. And so corrupt politicians and nonsense in the U.S. Is part of the reason why Ukraine was quite vulnerable. We can go into more of that in the future if people continue to join this conversation. But I know that touching these political things is difficult in America, but it's a little bit more difficult to face missiles and drones from an evil empire that I don't think is going to stop here.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody can understand what it's like to be there if you're not there. Meantime, listen, don't be going to sleep so soundly, okay?
I won't.
Thanks.
There's going to be some sleepless days and weeks ahead of us from every bit of intelligence I hear. So until tomorrow, Bob.
Thank you, Joe. Stay alert.
Thank you for introducing Ukraine on your social media pages. That's very important, that much more people can get more information about the situation here and how everybody can help Ukraine to stay stronger and to save all the world.
Что он сказал?
Well, which side are you on?
На чьей ты стороне?
Come on now. Oh, which side are you on?
На чьей ты стороне?
Ебать.